Welcome back to the UN Climate Talks. We're broadcasting live from Cancun in Mexico. I'm delighted to say that I've been joined by Raja and Katha, so I'll kick off by asking you both to introduce yourselves to our viewers.
Hi, I'm Raja Jarrah. I work for CARE International and I'm working on forests in Tanzania.
Okay. And Katha?
Hi, I'm Katha. I'm from India. I work with the Center for Policy Research in India, and here I'm representing the Indian Youth Delegation.
Okay, excellent. And as you both know, we've been talking a lot about women's role in climate change today, and I know that you were on a panel discussing some of these topics earlier. So we're going to focus on that subject for the interview. But first of all, I wanted to ask you about your experiences of climate change in your countries. So, Raja, what was it that kind of motivated you to get involved in trying to address climate change?
I've been working in a development organisation for a couple of decades now. Mm-hmm. And I could see that in some of the communities where we worked, some of the advances that we thought we had wasn't raining as much, and droughts were more frequent. So it got me interested in trying to find out the root cause of that, and that however much you try to help people adapt, if the life that they are leading is getting generally worse because of climate change, there needs to be a new game in town, and that's how I discovered that climate change was a problem.
Mm-hmm. And Katha, what about you?
Unlike Raja, I'm a new entrant to the climate change field. I just recently completed my Masters in Development Studies, and then I went to Bangladesh to work on climate change in the villages over there. And after that, I came back home to India and I started working on policy in climate change and looking at sort of what India was doing on climate change, because I was really interested. India's come up as a big player in the climate change game, but I'm not sure how much we're doing. So I'm looking at that now.
And so both of you have a development background. We've spoken a lot today about the specific impacts of climate change on women. What about the potential for women to be really kind of central to the solutions in climate change and to be empowered by the solutions that people are looking to impose or looking to implement regarding climate change and that might come out of these talks?
Well, I'm not going to do any crystal ball grazing about what's going to come out of these talks. But one of the big things that they're negotiating right now is this thing called RED. I don't know if people know about that, but it's basically the scheme for trying to reduce forest deforestation and increase the rehabilitation of deforested areas in exchange for carbon money. And the conversation up to now has all been about the technicalities of how you calculate which forests are eligible and how you calculate the money and who gets the money. But there's been very little discussion about the role of women in this. And even when people do talk about the role of women, they talk about women being victims of climate change and women depending on forests, and therefore if you exclude them forests, then they're going to suffer more. Very few people have talked about the fact that actually this could be an opportunity. Because women depend so much on forests, and because forest management is in the hands of women in many, many places across the world, that if we can also put the responsibility for conserving those forests and benefiting from the carbon money from those forests in the hands of women, you have a chance for a new avenue for empowerment, which is new. It hasn't been tried before. So I would like to see people think of women more as agents of change, and we're in a situation of change. The climate is changing, the world has to change in order to adapt to that changing climate. Well, let's put that change in the hands of women.
And Katha, in your experience, like what role do women play in India in terms of coping with climate change and addressing the solutions?
So it's a very interesting situation in India. India is a primarily agrarian society. 60% of our population is invested in the agricultural sector, and unfortunately the Indian system does not recognize women as farmers. 70% of Indian women are actually farmers, but the commonsensical definition within policy of a farmer is male. So any entitlements, any rights, any benefits, any schemes that are provided to the agricultural sector are targeted towards men, which is really unfortunate. Women are making decisions on the field, women are running households, women are making sure that the children go to school, women are running villages, there are village heads which are women, but the sense of entitlement is still not there. And in India we have this very famous saying that you educate and empower a woman, you educate a whole village, you educate a whole community, you educate a whole city. And there's a spiral of change that you sort of set into motion when you educate and empower a woman. But social policies and systems around thinking need to change for that. And I don't think it's just a climate change problem. It's a larger systemic issue. Climate change can be the venue to facilitate that change, but it's a larger question of empowerment and changing your thinking.
So can I just pick up on that? You said a couple of things that are really, really interesting. In fact, you said a lot of things that are really interesting, but there's two I want to pick up on. One is this thing about climate change being a venue for doing things that we should have been doing anyway. And I think that's one of the I hate to say that there's a great thing happening about climate change, but it is one of the advantages, is that's made a new set of people focus on things that are sensible, that we've been saying for decades that should be done. And the second thing that you said that was really important was the role of women in, how do I put it, reproducing the culture, in educating children and setting the norms of the next generation. Because with a new climate regime, and the climate is going to change, nobody's going to stop it. However many pledges happen in that room, then we're not going to stop it. We're all going to have different lifestyles, and that means different lifestyles for the rich to stop them polluting so much, but also different lifestyles for poor communities because they have different environments to respond to. And the teachers of the new generation are going to be the women, and they're the custodians, if you like, of the mental skill sets that we need to survive in the new world.
And so, like, we've spoken a lot about impacts, and it's often quite depressing when we're at these conferences and you hear about the negotiations proceeding very slowly, or you hear about arguments between countries, or you hear devastating news of the impacts of climate change around the world. But actually this conversation seems to be highlighting some potential opportunities here to really transform kind of gender relations or power relations across societies. Do you think am I overstating the case? Or because we've also heard this morning that women's participation at these conferences it's largely absent. There's less than 20% of the lead negotiators are women, and that the texts of the UNFCCC kind of gender isn't really recognised in the convention. Yeah. So should I be optimistic or pessimistic about this?
I think we're moving in the right direction. If you look at the structure right now, Margaret, who's the head of the ad hoc working group on the long-term cooperative action, is a woman. The president of the COP, Patricia Espinosa, is a woman. The head of the UNFCCC is a woman. All are women in positions of power, in positions of change, and with great thinking about how they want to run the climate change regime and make it more enabling. So clearly, we're moving towards, I wouldn't say we're there yet and everything's done. But yes, 20 years ago, you would never have had the head of a UN as a woman. 30 years ago, it would have been completely impossible to see a chairman running sort of a long-term visioning group within a multilateral system who was from a developing country, who was from the global south, and who was a woman. So 3 disempowered positions put together. But that's changing, and I think we're optimistic, but we need to be realistic about the pace at which this change is going to come into effect.
She's also the daughter of the president of that developing country, so it's not...
Yeah, that was such an upbeat message. I'm not going to say anything against it, but it is very upbeat. There's a long way to go. Yeah. There's a long way to go, and I think however many advances that we can make at this level, at the policy level, where there's visible, capable, empowered women making their mark, and at the local level, where the climate rubber hits the road, so to speak, it's still a very long struggle. And I would. Yes, there are opportunities in climate change, just like in any moment of change. Mm-hmm. If there are the right ingredients in place, you can take advantage of them and change things for the better. Mm-hmm. But also, if you get a bit complacent, saying, well, okay, climate change is an opportunity, therefore women will get empowered. Actually, no. Mm-hmm. Business as usual will usually reinforce the status quo and usually make things worse. Mm-hmm. So it's up to all of us that are involved in one way or another with climate change to say, okay, the change is opening up opportunities. It's our job to take advantage of those opportunities. If we don't, they will close up unused, and then they'll open again. It's like in a situation of war or a situation of emergency. It does provide horrible things that happen to people, but it also provides opportunities for good change if somebody can harness them. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to mention a small case study from India on sort of the grassroots development of this movement of women around environmental disasters. Very recently, farmer women organized themselves into a group and said, we're worse affected by climate change as opposed to our male counterparts. And what happens is, if a disaster hits and there are fewer resources, women will get less food, women will eat last. Women will have less assets. They will be made to sell their animals. They will be made to sell their jewelry. They will be the most affected and least compensated. So the women organized themselves into a group and actually lobbied to the government to do something, to make specific targeted programs for women farmers to address this issue. So, all over the world, I think these small grassroots movements are cropping up, and we need to sort of help them come up, and we need to help them articulate their voices better. But it's happening. I'm not completely in a very pessimistic place about it. It's happening. But there needs to be more climate information, and things like these that de-jargonize what's happening at the negotiations and sending it across the world are really, really important.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Raja, I know that you're working with women kind of on the front lines of climate change. In your experience, do they recognise the link between what they're seeing on a daily basis and the kind of the global climate change that scientists see, and are they mobilising around this issue?
No, I think that's one of the really hardest things about climate change, because climate change is different from bad weather. Mm-hmm. Climate change is a long-term phenomenon, and with us, it's beyond our experience, and we can only maybe, if we talk to the oldest of our grandparents, maybe come up with some anecdotal stories of, the summers used to be nicer and that kind of thing. But actually, within the space of a generation, you don't really feel climate change. So it's actually quite difficult to explain to people that climate change is happening and climate change is a problem that they need to take seriously. You do see environmental changes, though. Mm-hmm. And people can more easily relate to the fact that the forests are disappearing, or that we are getting more dry years than we used to. Whether they can understand that as something that's a global trend that's going to get worse and worse and worse and cumulative, I'm not sure. But the fact that if you can offer responses that deal with the experiences that they are having, that they know that their children will face. Mm-hmm. Then that's much more immediate and much more easy to get people to understand.
And what kind of initiatives are happening in the villages and the communities that you're working in to kind of spread information and education, and to help people cope with the changes that are coming or that they're seeing already?
Well, I talked earlier about RED, and I'm going to give an example from RED. The idea with RED is that communities manage the forests that they're in charge of better, so that they can reduce the rate of deforestation, and then turn that reduced deforestation into carbon money. And what we're trying to do in the project that I'm involved in is create a community fund that's managed not necessarily exclusively by women, but managed by a village committee that's got a very large influence of women's voices, so that the decisions on how that money is spent bear in mind the needs and the opinions of women. And so through that process, which is essentially, I feel like, a technical process of turning trees into carbon money, can also have a social benefit, because the end use of that money is empowering to women.
I'm going to wrap it up there, because we ought to push on with our schedule. But thank you both really very much for joining us. It's another interesting discussion. And I believe our tech man will take us to a video, and then we'll push on. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Justin.
It was lovely meeting you, Raja.